Hello, I'm Walter Smith, Chair of the Casey Family Programs Board of Trustees. It is my great honor to present this 2022 Casey Excellence for Children Leadership Award to Navajo Nation President Jonathan Nez. President Nez was elected to this role in 2019 after previously serving as Vice President of the Navajo Nation. He took on this role not knowing that his nation and the entire world would soon be rocked by a global pandemic. President Nez has overseen COVID-19 vaccination campaign that has moved vaccination rates to above 70%. He's led his nation's response and recovery efforts, championing the use of federal funding to support once-in-a-lifetime opportunities to invest in critical infrastructure projects that will improve the well-being of children and families for future generations. Among his priorities are support for mental and behavioral health treatment and assistance as families and communities recover from the pandemic's far-reaching impacts. President Nez, congratulations on this well-deserved award.
Thank you so much. I am honored to be awarded the Casey Excellence for Children Leadership Award. Thank you for that.
Yeah. So thanks for joining us and for a conversation about your work to build hope for the Navajo Nation. We've just mentioned how you've led a response and recovery efforts related to COVID-19. Could you share the impact some of these initiatives have had on the well-being of children and families?
Well, thank you for that question. Um, Walter, at the early onset of this pandemic, there was a lot of fear, so much uncertainty. At that time, there was no vaccine. So all we were hearing were news reports of people catching the virus, even dying. And when we saw this virus come to the United States, we here on the Navajo Nation mobilized and we developed our own preparedness team to begin to be more proactive and get ourselves ready. If we were a state, we would have probably been one of the last states to get a COVID positive case. Everyone around us, the 4 states around us, did get cases. And of course, eventually when you're surrounded, it'll come in. And that's what happened early on. And we did our own protocols. We're a sovereign nation. We have the ability to govern ourselves, and we took control by putting some very strict protocols in place, telling people to stay home. We even had weekend lockdowns, mask mandates. Matter of fact, we still have a mask mandate today. We never wavered. We never said no more masks. And to this day, we still have it. And of course, people were at home. And so how this virus has affected our children or families, of course, they were the lives were disrupted by this virus. They couldn't go to school. They couldn't go to work. But, there's always something positive that comes out of a trying time. And that's what happened with COVID. Rather than tell people to stay home and be scared of a virus, we actually challenged our families and our children and say, parents, you're now at home. Children, you're not in school, you're at home. So utilize that time to talk about life, to talk about things that they may be going through. Clean off that dinner table, as I said before, and come back and enjoy a home-cooked meal and talk to one another. And I think really during that time that we were at home with our families really strengthened the foundation of this nation. There was people were at home, yes, but we just told them not to just stay in the house and be scared, but you're at home, go tend to the livestock, go check up on your elders, your grandparents. And when you're doing that, teach your children about our language, our way of life, teachings, and share with them the resilience, of how our ancestors uh, went through some difficult and trying times throughout our history. You've heard stories of the long walk. Talk about those things as a part of healing from those traumas. And, I think really there was a renaissance of our teachings and our language. And now as we transition slowly out of the pandemic, we've been challenging our schools to continue that momentum in our communities.
President Nez, I can really hear in your response your excellent leadership in trying to take a pandemic and making it into an opportunity for families to become stronger. So good for you. It's exactly what I think excellent leadership is. In 2017, Casey Family Programs recognized the Navajo Nation in your efforts to prevent youth suicide and build hope for young people. In your work during the pandemic, you also prioritize mental and behavioral health care.
Mhm.
Why did you choose that focus during the pandemic, and what have you seen?
I think with the difficulties in our history as indigenous peoples, and in our case, the Navajo people, we have gone through some extraordinary times, some difficulties. Little do people know that the first citizens of this country were treated poorly, with the westward expansion and the move for land. We were displaced. And for us Navajos, we were put together in groups and sent 400 miles away from here to a foreign land that we didn't know, and we had to be there for few years. And we signed a treaty, and that treaty is our. We have a special relationship with the federal government. As you know, the U.S. Constitution, only foreign countries can go into treaties with the U.S. government, but it also says tribal nations. And that's an agreement between two sovereigns. And so the federal government recognized the sovereignty of tribes, and for us, the Navajo Nation, in 1868. And once we signed that treaty, we returned back to our homelands. We 400 miles there and 400 miles back. And our ancestors have persevered through some of these challenging times. So a lot of that hurt, that frustration, and even anger has been passed from one generation to the next. And it's no wonder, when I was the vice president, we focused on healing. We focused on mental health and behavioral health. Many of our citizens are being attacked by these monsters. Yeah, we call them monsters. Our worldview is that monsters are here that disrupt Navajo life, and we are given the weapons to fight off these monsters. And that, just giving you a glimpse of our worldview. Um, we grew up stories of learning about poverty, hunger, old age, lice, those monsters that plagued our people. There were hero twins that were sent down to help the Navajo people. They were given weapons to fight off these monsters. And today we are given weapons. And this is what I use throughout the pandemic, talking to our elders, letting them know that we have the ability to fight off this new monster, this modern day monster called COVID-19, by utilizing our teaching, our way of life, and to help heal. And today, modern day monsters is just not COVID-19. You got alcoholism, drug addiction, diabetes, depression, suicide. And we are given the tools, as they say, for our toolbox. That's what, society says, but for indigenous peoples, it's being given the weapons to fight off these monsters. And let me just give you an example of the armor and the weapons that are used to combat this new monster called COVID-19. You know, obviously the armor is the masks and the vaccines. And it's no wonder our elders uh, accepted that message. You know, our elders, you would think, would be the first to say, I don't know, I don't want that vaccine in me. But framing it in the way to where our elders understand, they accepted it and they knew that it wasn't for themselves. It wasn't about restricting individual freedoms or, you know, like what we heard off the nation, Navajo Nation, where people said, you're forcing me to wear a mask or you're taking my freedom by telling me to stay home. It wasn't about that. It was about the collective whole. It was about the family, protecting the community, placing a bubble over the Navajo Nation to protect our most vulnerable population. And, you know, today we've turned it around. Our elders, 65 and over, Walter, 65 and over, 90% are fully vaccinated. And that's an awesome statistic. You know, thinking that, you know, again, elders would be the first one to say, I don't want any type of foreign medicine in me. But they knew the value of the medicine because it was the armor. And they shared that with the rest of the Navajo citizen. And that was all a part of the healing and the balance. We call it hojon, restoration, to bring back balance within oneself and the community. So dealing with mental health, we just continued what we had done with suicide prevention and just inspiring or encouraging our Navajo people not to give up. And this is a true story of resilience, of how a nation turned it around from being one of the highest per capita COVID positive in the country to now the probably maybe one of the most vaccinated people. And just yesterday, Walter, 3 people caught the virus here on the Navajo Nation. 3 people, 0 deaths. And that just magnifies the resilience of our Navajo people. And so I commend the Navajo people for doing an outstanding work, listening to their health professionals, their leaders, and it was because of them that we were able to turn it around.
President Nez, you are such a well deserved recipient of this award. I can hear your wonderful communication, your way of integrating important messages of prevention and wellness into your culture to make it relevant for everyone in your community. So thank you for your thoughtful conversation, and congratulations again on a well-deserved, much-deserved leadership award.
Thank you, and thank you to the Casey family programs, and I accept this award on behalf of the Navajo people. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Now, let's meet our next outstanding honoree.